First up, I think we should hear from Aaron in Kansas. Pronouns are he, him, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about gender abolition. Aaron, welcome to the show. How's it going? Can you hear us, Aaron?
Hi, Shannon. Hi, Kara. Hi, Christy. Sorry, my phone was muted. Thanks for having me. I did want to talk about gender abolitionism. I just didn't know if this was the right show to do it.
No problem. You came
We'll
to
see
the
what
right
we can
place.
do. Yeah, what's on your mind?
So I have a best friend who recently came out as trans and fully supporting her in her journey. Maddie, if you're listening, what's up? Shout out. But as we were talking about her wanting to be identified as a woman, as opposed to a man, I was wondering what she sort of expected sort of society or the world to treat her differently as. If she's identifying, if she's expressing herself as a woman, what is it that she's asking the world to do in return when they meet that expression? And as, the conversation got in depth and we started to talk about, what it means to be non-binary as opposed to, settling on being a man or being a woman or something entirely different, gender abolition came up. And neither of us really understood what it meant to just throw the gender bucket out of the window. And so I thought I would go and seek out people who maybe are more familiar with the topic and what the implications of gender abolitionism is. And you can talk me through it. And maybe I can go back to Maddie and we can have a more informed conversation.
Great. Yeah. Aaron, I love to hear that your first thought was to make sure that you're being supportive of your friend. I think that's really, really speaks highly
Absolutely.
of you and your friendship. So thank you for doing that. And for our viewers who might not be familiar, when you're talking about gender abolitionism, what exactly do you mean by that? Or is that what you wanted us to discuss further?
Well, yes, I did want to discuss further specifically what it means, because gender is such a complicated topic, I think. Or it's a layered topic. It doesn't have to be complicated. I think sometimes people they stress themselves out trying to just accept people for who they are. But for gender abolitionism, I guess the way we were understanding it is that, we sort of throw out gender norms, we throw out gender expressions, and people just are, more than my pronouns. I'm just my name. And there's not really conceptually, when you hear woman or hear man, nothing is supposed to instantiate is in your mind. You're just supposed to see the person first. That's sort of where gender abolition, that's how we were talking about it, but I don't know how practical that is. I don't know. So that's why I come to you and come to others to learn more about what that means or what that could mean.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, right? The practicality, because we can all sit here and contemplate our navels and discuss what an idealized society might look like. And we can maybe suss this out. I'm curious to hear from the two of you. I'm not so convinced that a utopian society is without gender. I might say that gender is a lot less prescriptive and condemning than our modern society is. But I don't know. It definitely seems like there's not a lot of opportunity to abolish gender if we actually did have access to that button. It's something people cling pretty strongly to. How do y'all feel about the notion of a utopia without gender?
I love this question. Thank you for calling in with this question, Aaron. I actually recently had a conversation about this with someone else too, and I'm of two minds on this. And I'm going to make the perennial non-binary joke. I have a hard time, landing on just one thing. But on the one hand, I personally do love the idea or the fantasy of, what if we just didn't have gender, threw it out the window and just don't even think about it anymore. You're not going to be imposing anything thing on anyone. And to me, that would feel really comfortable. I would love that personally. Um, Something I have come to realize over time, having conversations with other people when I tell them that I'm non-binary, is that actually a lot of people, it seems to me, really do find a lot of value and meaning in their gender identity as a man or a woman or whatever it is. And to take that away from them could be, very, very traumatic and upsetting. In the same way that I feel upset by someone trying to force a gender identity onto me that I don't identify with, taking it away from someone, in some ways could be a similar experience, I suppose. So that's something I've been kind of dealing with myself. And then on the other hand, I do kind of have the sense that, gender is to me one of those social constructs like race, which is to say that gender really, to my mind, doesn't exist outside of the framework of sexism and discrimination. And so it is kind of built into it, if you will. So it is problematic, in a systemic way, I think, too. So there I am, not taking a position.
I mean, Kara,
I really appreciate that, because that's sort of where Maddie's point was coming from, was that, she feels that she's a woman. And even if that isn't like a prescriptive concept, it's a descriptive concept, or maybe I'm getting the words mixed up. She felt as though that identity shouldn't be taken from her, but also that she sees a problematic history behind genderifying things completely. So we didn't know what the least problematic position was, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in some sort of fantasy, I guess we could think of it in terms of everybody having their own gender, where everybody's just allowed to be who they are. And I've definitely pointed out on this show that I think that there's value in that idea. I think it's not unreasonable to imagine that there are some 7.5 or however many human beings we're up to billion genders on the planet. But then that does beg the question, like, well, what does that word even mean then? If everybody has their own, is this really a category? And I take your point, Kara, that there's a lot of history of these categories being used almost exclusively, if not entirely exclusively, for problematic reasons. But I just really, truly believe that people are going to want to find their like kind and their opposite kind, and they're going to want to have some sort of category here. I appreciate the equivocating. Shannon, do you have anything more finite for us?
Kara totally took all the words right out of my mouth. It's, as a non-binary person myself, personally, what is gender? I don't know. Whereas at the same time, I'm not going to, invalidate someone else's experience of feeling like they are a particular gender, and especially who have struggled with that, to define that, made moves to try to live it more, or feel they can't make moves to like, there's no way someone's going through all of that if they don't feel pretty passionately about gender. So yeah. I'm not about to, take that away from them.
Yeah. So Aaron, I think the closest any of us can get to anything substantive would be to say that, yes, as a society, like the larger global culture needs to change some ideas around gender. That is very obviously on display in this country right now. There is a lot of problems. And if you gave me a magic button to either maintain the status quo or somehow delete the concept of gender from the source code of the universe, maybe I'd push it. Maybe. But I don't have access to that button. So it feels almost silly to get too hung up on some of these ideas, because we can be pushing for a better society, and maybe someday we'll all collectively agree that that's the society we want. I don't think I'm going to live to see it. But as far as would anybody ever want that society, we can look at different anthropological studies around the world of small communities, people who live in something more resembling what we imagine most humans across most of humanity have lived like. And we see some very bizarre, well, I'll say bizarre, but just some unique and interesting ideas that are around gender that are so different from what we sort of as a larger society believe things should be. What does that really mean? What can we actually take from that? I think anybody who pretends to have that answer is full of shit. You know, it's too much of a singularity. We're not going to be able to see that reality anytime soon. Could it happen? Could we create a society where there was truly a singular race, where there was a true opportunity to have a unique or diverse gender? Maybe, I guess, sure. But it's mostly posturing. And I would encourage people now to be working towards affirming the rights of all genders rather than trying to get rid of genders.
No, I really appreciate all three of your perspectives on this. You're touching on a lot of this really sounds similar to the conversation I was having with my friend Maddie about this, about making sure we respect sort of the people where they're at, even if we might have greater questions about that, utopic society that you mentioned, Christy. I don't know. Part of me feels like maybe it's an unavoidable colliding point in the future where people who are, say, non-binary and people who are trans and people who are, say, a woman, a cis woman, they are all competing over how we should respect their identities. And I just want to make sure I'm not on the wrong side of that collision, I guess, is the reason for my question.
Well, I think that we can respect vanilla and chocolate equally. Like, they don't have to be in competition with each other. And I don't think that our femmes and demi-boys and butches and cat girls and however the hell else we want to describe ourselves needs to be anything more than a personal descriptor. It doesn't need to be something that we rank or compete around. Now, maybe you can say that that's just sort of human nature. I don't know that I truly believe that. I think that it's much more nuanced and complicated the way that people are able to operate in places of abundance. I don't know. I don't want to get too far down a anthropological or a evolutionary psychology rabbit hole, because even though I find that really fascinating, I want to very much acknowledge that it's a little bit like alchemy. Evolutionary psychology is really, really interesting stuff, but we have to acknowledge what we don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that, Christy, too. And I kind of want to go back to what you started with, Aaron, in this conversation, which was that you were trying to make sure that you were supporting your friend. And, I think that that's possible to do, regardless of whether we solve the philosophical question of, what if it was like this or what if it was like that? And, would the world be a better place if X, Y, and Z? And maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But if that's not the world that we currently live in now anyway, maybe that's not what our focus has to be on. I tend to think that sometimes people are surprised when they hear about people who are having a more expansive conception of gender. And maybe the knee-jerk reaction is to think, kind of like y'all were saying, well, this is a zero-sum game. If they get their gender, I lose mine, I don't think it really has to be that way.
Yeah, it most likely doesn't. Honestly, as I was speaking to her, I asked if there was anything in her day-to-day life that was going to change. She's still going to play video games. She's still going to play basketball. She's still going to do pretty much a mix of what one might stereotypically categorize as masculine, but also gender-neutral things, or feminine things, like pretty much everything that I know of this person for the last, 8 years that we've been friends. Their day-to-day activities are going to stay the same. She's just wanting me to respect her gender identity. I'm going to do so. So I just wanted to talk about what I might be missing, what I might, I don't know. Maybe this is just, like you say, like alchemy, like ethereal, conceptual stuff that just practically won't manifest in
Well,
our
and
day-to-day
being
friendship.
curious about alchemy led to a lot of understanding of chemistry and physics. So yeah, let's acknowledge that it's a little bit on like the bleeding edge of what we understand about the world, but it's okay to play there as long as we don't take anything too seriously.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well,
I appreciate the feedback. I'll be sure to share this call when it goes on YouTube. Yeah, thank you all for having me.
great. Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate the call. That was great. Have a good one.
You too.